Close the door if you can. Lower the brightness around you. Put the phone face down. Do not play music. Do not search for a perfect meditation posture. Sit with your feet on the floor, or lie on your back, or stand near a window with your hands loose and your jaw unlocked. Now remove one layer of sound. Not all sound. That is almost impossible. Just one layer. No voice in your ears. No video speaking in the next tab. No podcast filling the gap. No short clip waiting to bite into your attention. For 60 seconds, give your brain the one stimulus modern life almost never gives it on purpose. A pause it cannot scroll. At first, silence will not feel like silence. It will feel like leftover noise. You may hear the room, the refrigerator, the blood in your ears, a car somewhere outside, a tiny click in the wall, your own breathing, suddenly too close. Your mind may rush forward as if someone removed a guardrail. Let it. Do not try to become calm. Just notice what happens when nothing new arrives. Your brain has spent the day catching falling objects that were never physical. Words, alerts, opinions, unfinished tasks, voices, thumbnails, fragments of other people's urgency. Then, when night comes, you ask sleep to repair everything at once. But sleep cannot erase a day that never gave the waking brain a chance to put anything down. This is the paradox. The most productive thing your brain may need before sleep is not another technique, another soundscape, another optimization, or another explanation. It may need silence, not because silence is empty, because silence is the first place where the brain can hear its own unfinished work. Stephen Hawking built a life around a truth most people only understand in crisis. The universe is not only made of things, it is made of signals, limits, boundaries, and what happens when movement is constrained. When his body lost nearly every easy channel of expression, his mind had to become precise about what information mattered. Noise became expensive. Signal became sacred. That is the scientific meaning of silence. It is not nothing. It is a reduction in competing input, so the nervous system can detect what was buried underneath. You think silence is rest because nothing is happening. But inside the brain, silence does not create a blank page. It changes the ratio between outside information and inside information. It lowers the flood at the gate, and suddenly the brain can register its own rhythms, its own memory traces, its own predictions, its own errors, its own fatigue. Sleep is powerful. Sleep is irreplaceable. But sleep is not the only offline state your brain uses. Before sleep can do its deep work, your waking brain often needs a clearing space, a buffer zone, a small interval where new input stops arriving long enough for old input to stop shouting. And if that is true, then the question becomes uncomfortable. If silence is not empty, what has your brain been trying to do all day that your noise never allowed it to finish? Your brain is not a sponge. That is the first mistake. People talk about the brain as if it absorbs information passively, like a wet cloth soaking up the world. But the brain is closer to a prediction engine under electrical pressure. It constantly guesses what will happen next, compares the guess with incoming signals, corrects the mismatch, and spends energy deciding what can be ignored. This means sound is never just sound. A voice is not just air pressure, it is meaning. A notification is not just a beep, it is possible demand. A song is not just vibration, it is rhythm, memory, emotion, timing, anticipation. Even soft background audio is not neutral if your brain has to parse it. Your auditory system begins with hair cells in the cochlea, microscopic mechanical sensors inside the inner ear. Sound bends them. Bending opens ion channels. Movement becomes electricity. Electricity becomes timing. Timing becomes interpretation. Before you know you heard anything, the brainstem has already sorted the signal, the thalamus has already relayed it, the auditory cortex has already begun mapping patterns, and attention has already decided whether this matters. That decision is expensive. A human ear can detect an enormous range of pressure changes, from faint whispers to harmful noise. But the deeper fact is not sensitivity. It is vigilance. Your nervous system evolved in environments where sound could mean water, weather, animal movement, another human, threat, safety, distance, territory, or direction. The ear does not close like the eye. Even during sleep, the brain still samples sound. It has to. The skull may be bone, but attention has no lid. The modern belief is that background noise helps because it fills the room. The science is more exact. Sometimes predictable sound can mask sharper disturbances, and sometimes music can regulate mood. But continuous input also occupies the systems that need empty intervals to reorganize. Your brain cannot fully stop evaluating the world while the world keeps talking to it. A number matters here. About 1/5 of the body's resting energy budget is used by the brain, even though the brain is only about 2% of body mass. That does not mean thinking hard burns calories like sprinting. It means the baseline operation of perception, prediction, memory, and regulation is already metabolically expensive. Silence does not give the brain energy like a pill. It removes some of the work that was quietly spending it. Think of a control room with hundreds of small lights. When every panel flashes at once, the operator does not become more informed. He becomes less able to tell which signal matters. Silence is not the destruction of the control room. It is dimming the irrelevant panels long enough for the hidden alarm to be visible. And the hidden alarm is often not dramatic. It may be unresolved emotion. It may be a memory your brain has not filed. It may be a body signal you covered with entertainment. It may be a problem that does not need more information, only enough quiet for the existing information to connect. Before the next layer, if this kind of science helps you understand your own body without turning it into a trend, subscribe and like the video. Not for noise, but so this channel can keep turning small gestures into serious biology. The anatomy of silence begins in the ear, but it does not end there. It spreads through attention. When outside sound decreases, the brain does not simply power down. Networks that were suppressed by task demands begin to become more visible. One of them is commonly called the default mode network, a set of interacting brain regions often active during internally directed thought, autobiographical memory, simulation of the future, and self-referential processing. The name is misleading. Default does not mean useless. It means the brain has a mode for when it is not being dragged by a specific external task. This mode is not always peaceful. Sometimes it becomes rumination. Sometimes it becomes worry. Sometimes it becomes the painful replay of what you avoided all day. But that does not make the network defective. It means silence exposes material that stimulation can hide. This is why silence can feel uncomfortable at first. You are not failing at silence. You are hearing the backlog. The brain has another system involved here, the hippocampus, a curved structure deep in the temporal lobe, central to forming and organizing memory. During sleep, the hippocampus participates in replaying and consolidating experiences, helping stabilize some memories while allowing others to fade or integrate. But waking rest also appears to matter. Research on wakeful rest has shown that brief periods of quiet, undistracted rest after learning can support memory consolidation compared with active distraction. That is the part sleep cannot always do alone. If every waking gap is filled with input, the brain loses small opportunities to protect new information from interference. You learn something, then immediately bury it under a feed. You feel something, then immediately cover it with a voice. You notice fatigue, then immediately stimulate yourself past it. By bedtime, sleep receives not one clean day, but a pile of interrupted processes. The brain can still work, but you have made the work harder. Now the mechanism begins. In the first seconds of silence, the change is not mystical. It is sensory arithmetic. Incoming auditory load drops. The cochlea still samples the room, but the cortex receives fewer organized streams requiring semantic interpretation. If there is no speech, the brain does not have to decode language. If there is no music, it does not have to follow rhythm, melody, prediction, and emotional association. If there is no video, it does not have to bind sound to image, story, novelty, and social meaning. The gate is not closed, the traffic is reduced. In that reduction, attention changes its target. External monitoring loosens. Internal signals gain contrast. Your breathing becomes easier to notice. Jaw tension becomes obvious. The pressure behind the eyes stops being invisible. Your thoughts, which were previously competing with the world, come forward not because silence created them, but because silence stopped hiding them. Milliseconds to seconds. The nervous system samples the absence of demand. Then comes the second layer. Seconds to minutes. When silence continues, the brain can shift from reactive orientation to internal organization. This does not mean you instantly relax. In many people, the first minutes of silence reveal agitation because the nervous system has been running too fast to feel itself. The body may search for the next stimulus, the hand may reach for the phone, the mind may invent tasks. That urge is part of the mechanism. It shows how trained the brain has become to treat empty time as danger or waste. But if the silence remains gentle and voluntary, breathing can slow, muscle tone can soften, attention can stop snapping outward. The brain's prediction system receives a rare message. Nothing urgent is arriving right now. That message is not a thought. It is a condition. A condition changes physiology more deeply than a slogan. The third layer is the one people miss. Silence may create a waking offline interval. Not sleep, not meditation performance, not forced relaxation, but a stretch of time where new information stops competing with recent information. In this state, the brain may strengthen, sort, compare, or integrate what already happened. It can detect patterns that constant input kept fragmenting. It can let emotional residue rise before sleep, instead of pushing it into sleep's first fragile stages. This is where the comparison with a drug becomes tempting, but also dangerous. A drug is a molecule that binds to receptors and pushes physiology in a direction. Silence is not a molecule. It does not enter the bloodstream. It does not bind to one receptor, but it changes the operating conditions under which many receptors, networks, and rhythms work. It is closer to turning down the factory noise so the machine can be calibrated. The industry sells silence as a sound. White noise machines, brown noise playlists, sleep frequencies, ambient loops, relaxation apps. Some of these can be useful for some people, especially when the real environment is unpredictable. But the body's older mechanism is different. It is not adding a better layer. It is removing enough layers for the nervous system to regain access to itself. That is what the brain does for free when nothing keeps interrupting it. One study often discussed in this context was led by Imke Kerster and colleagues, published in 2013 in Brain Structure and Function. The study was done in mice, not humans, so it cannot be used to claim that silence grows human brain cells in the same way. But the result is still striking as a biological clue. They compared different auditory conditions and found that silence, after 7 days of repeated exposure, was associated with a strong response in immature neurons in the hippocampus. Be careful with that sentence. It does not mean 60 seconds of silence will grow your brain. It means the absence of sound is not necessarily biologically inert. Even in an animal brain, silence can be a condition the nervous system responds to. The absence itself becomes information. The brain does not treat quiet as a blank. It treats it as a changed environment. This is why Hawking belongs in the frame. His science repeatedly attacked the naive idea that empty space is simply empty. In quantum field theory and black hole physics, what looks like nothing can still have structure, fluctuation, boundary, consequence. A horizon is not just a line. A vacuum is not just a void. Absence can have physics. Silence has nervous system physics. Not because it is cosmic magic, because a biological system is defined not only by what stimulates it, but by what stops stimulating it long enough for regulation to emerge. The common belief is that silence is the absence of stimulation. The mechanism rewrites it. Silence is a change in the brain's information economy, where fewer external signals allow internal repair, memory sorting, and autonomic downshifting to become easier to detect. Hours of modern noise do something subtle. They steal endings. A conversation ends, but the podcast begins. Work ends, but the phone begins. Dinner ends, but the screen begins. A thought begins, but a notification interrupts it. You do not only lose peace, you lose closure. The brain is forced to carry partial loops because the environment keeps offering the next input before the previous one can settle. That accumulation has consequences. One consequence is mental fatigue that feels like lack of motivation. You think you are lazy because you cannot start the next task. But part of the brain may not be lazy. It may be overloaded by context switching, unfinished interpretation, and constant sensory prediction. Silence does not make you disciplined by magic. It reduces the number of open channels competing for control. Another consequence is emotional heaviness at night. Many people say their anxiety appears only when they lie down, but often the anxiety was present earlier. The day was simply too loud for it to become conscious. At night, when external demands finally drop, the brain opens the drawer. Everything that was delayed falls out at once. So the problem is not that silence creates anxiety. The problem is that noise postpones it until the worst possible hour. A third consequence is shallow sleep pressure disguised as exhaustion. You can be tired and still not ready for sleep. That sounds contradictory, but biologically it makes sense. Sleep pressure builds through the day, but arousal can remain high if the nervous system has not received enough cues of safety, completion, and reduced demand. You collapse into bed with a tired body and a brain still scanning for the next signal. Then you blame sleep. But sleep was handed a nervous system that was never allowed to leave the day. Environmental noise research supports part of this larger picture. Reviews used for the World Health Organization's environmental noise guidelines have examined how noise exposure can disturb sleep, trigger awakenings, and affect physiological stress systems. Noise does not have to wake you fully to matter. The sleeping brain can still react. The body can still shift. The heart can still answer. If noise can intrude into sleep, then silence before sleep is not decorative. It is preparation of the threshold. This is why the phrase, "do what sleep can't do alone," matters. Sleep performs processes that silence cannot replace. Slow-wave activity, REM dreaming, glymphatic clearance patterns, hormonal rhythms, memory consolidation, synaptic recalibration. Silence cannot do those jobs instead of sleep. But silence can reduce waking interference before sleep begins. It can give the brain a runway instead of forcing it to land in a storm. The belief is that sleep begins when you close your eyes. The mechanism rewrites it. Sleep begins earlier, when the waking brain stops being forced to process a world that is no longer physically present. If you have ever felt tired but unable to rest, this is the hidden sequence. Your body is in night. Your brain is still in traffic. And silence is one of the simplest ways to remove the traffic without adding another command. If this makes you think of one sound you use every night just to avoid being alone with your own mind, write that sound in the comments. Not as confession, but as data. A fan, a podcast, a TV, a playlist, a city window. The exact sound matters because your brain learned its own form of escape. Silence also expands beyond the ear. It touches the stress system. The autonomic nervous system controls functions you do not micromanage. Heart rhythm, breathing depth, blood vessel tone, digestion, pupil size, sweat, readiness. It is not divided into a simple good side and bad side. Sympathetic activation is not evil. Parasympathetic activity is not always perfect. You need both. But you also need flexibility between them. Noise can reduce flexibility. Not every noise, not every person, not every context. But unwanted or unpredictable sound is a classic stressor because it removes control. The nervous system reacts more strongly when it cannot predict, escape, or interpret a signal. A sudden sound at night can raise alertness before the thinking mind has a chance to explain it away. Silence gives control back at the level of context. When you deliberately choose silence, the absence of stimulation is not deprivation. It is voluntary reduction. The brain reads that differently from isolation or threat. The body learns that no voice is demanding response, no rhythm is pulling timing, no external narrative is occupying imagination. In that voluntary pause, the nervous system can begin shifting from defense to restoration. This is also where breathing enters. In silence, breathing becomes audible from inside. Not because you are trying to breathe correctly, but because the respiratory signal is no longer masked. The sound of your own exhale, felt more than heard, can become a timing cue. Slow exhalation is linked to vagal influence on heart rhythm. But the point here is not to force a technique. The point is that silence makes spontaneous regulation noticeable. You cannot adjust what you cannot perceive. Modern life often removes perception before it removes health. You feel hungry only when the screen stops. You feel your neck only when the video ends. You feel loneliness only when the room goes quiet. You feel the unfinished argument only when the lights go off. The body was speaking earlier. The noise was louder. Silence restores signal-to-noise ratio. That phrase sounds technical, but your body knows it. In engineering, signal-to-noise ratio describes how much useful information exists compared with background interference. A weak signal can be lost in a noisy channel. The signal itself does not have to change. The noise around it only has to fall. Your brain is the channel. Your own state is the signal. This is why silence before sleep is not the same as doing nothing. It is a specific environmental manipulation. Remove speech, remove music, remove scrolling, remove task input. Leave ordinary room sound, leave breath, leave body, leave the faint hum of existence without narrative. The body will often begin showing you what the day covered. Shoulders drop. Or they do not. The jaw releases. Or it clenches. The stomach softens. Or you notice it has been held tight for hours. Thoughts scatter. Or one thought repeats. The silence is not failing when it reveals tension. It is succeeding as measurement. There is also an evolutionary reason this mechanism exists. For most of human history, silence was rarely absolute, but quiet mattered. A quieter environment at dusk meant fewer urgent disturbances, less movement, less social demand, lower visual activity, reduced hunting or working intensity, and a shift in the organism's relationship to space. The nervous system learned the difference between active day and protected night through physical cues, not through a bedtime reminder. Modernity breaks that sequence. Light continues, voice continues, novelty continues, work continues, music continues. The nervous system receives day pattern input deep into night. Then you expect sleep to appear because the clock says so. But biology does not obey the clock alone. It obeys contrast. Silence is contrast. Not silence as a perfect acoustic chamber. That can become strange, even unsettling, because the brain is not built for total sensory deprivation. The silence your brain needs is more ordinary and more usable. No intentional input for a short period. A room without a voice, a walk without headphones, a shower without a podcast, a bed without a video, a morning before the first notification. This is the baseline modernity removed, not health advice as decoration, a missing condition. Hawking understood that systems reveal themselves under limits. A body under constraint reveals what motion really means. A black hole reveals what gravity, temperature, and information might mean at the edge of comprehension. A brain under silence reveals what constant input had been concealing. The connection is not that Hawking prescribed silence. The connection is deeper. He knew that information is not free. Signals have cost. Boundaries matter. What enters a system changes what the system can do. What does not enter can matter too. Your brain lives by that physics. It is not separate from the universe because it is soft tissue. It is the universe arranged into cells that predict, remember, fear, sleep, repair, and listen. Now the protocol. Choose one moment each day when silence has a clear edge. Before bed works best for this title because the brain is preparing to cross from waking control into sleep architecture. But the mechanism also works after learning, after emotional overload, or after a long block of screen input. The dose is smaller than most people think because the goal is not heroic silence. The goal is a reliable threshold. Start with 2 minutes, not 30, not an hour. 2 minutes is enough to reveal whether your brain is using noise as anesthesia. Sit or lie down. No audio, no reading, no breathwork performance, no journaling, no prayer unless prayer is already silent and not mentally forced. Let the room be ordinary. Let the body be held by gravity. Let the brain discover that no new symbolic demand is arriving. If 2 minutes makes you restless, you have found the target. Restlessness is not proof you need more stimulation. It may be proof your system is withdrawing from constant input. After several nights, extend to 5 minutes, then 10. The minimum useful version is the one you will actually repeat. 10 minutes of real silence beats 1 dramatic hour that becomes a memory instead of a habit. The nervous system learns through repetition, not theatrical intensity. Place the silence before sleep, not after you are already half unconscious. If you wait until the body is collapsing, you will confuse silence with exhaustion. You want the waking brain to experience the transition. You want it to feel the difference between processing and not processing. You want the day to end while you are still awake enough to notice it ending. The position matters less than the sensory boundary. If lying down makes you fall asleep immediately, sit. If sitting makes you tense, lie down. If a dark room makes thoughts too loud at first, keep a low light. The point is not purity. The point is fewer channels. The body needs a condition it can believe. The signs that the mechanism is active are concrete. You may sigh without planning it. Your swallow rate may change. Your jaw may become noticeable. Your mind may replay the day in fragments, then slow. A problem may appear with less emotional heat. You may become aware of one unfinished task you should write down tomorrow, not solve tonight. Your breathing may lengthen on its own. You may feel boredom, then grief, then relief, then nothing dramatic at all. Nothing dramatic is still data. The errors are also concrete. Do not replace silence with quiet content. A calm voice is still a voice. A sleep story is still narrative. A soft video is still visual input. A playlist is still prediction. These tools can help in specific situations, especially for people with anxiety, tinnitus, trauma histories, or noisy environments, but they are not the same mechanism. They add a regulating stimulus. Silence removes competing stimulus. Different tool, different physics. Do not use silence as punishment. If the room becomes emotionally unsafe, open your eyes, turn on a light, feel your feet, or use grounding support. Silence is not a test of toughness. The nervous system changes best when the signal is strong enough to matter and safe enough to repeat. Do not chase a blank mind. A blank mind is not the goal. A less interrupted mind is the goal. Thoughts can appear. The question is whether each thought is immediately buried under something else. Silence lets the thought complete its arc. Completion is often calmer than suppression. For physical limitations, hearing differences, tinnitus, shared homes, or urban noise, adjust the condition. Silence does not require perfect absence of sound. It requires the absence of chosen information. A person with tinnitus may use low neutral masking if total quiet magnifies distress, while still removing speech, music, and scrolling. Someone in a loud building may use earplugs or a fan. The principle is not perfection. It is reducing meaningful input. Before this final part, subscribe and like the video if you want more scripts in this series, where small daily actions are explained through real mechanisms, not slogans. The deepest effect of silence is not that it makes you peaceful. Peace is too small a word. Silence gives the brain a boundary. All day the world crosses into you. Through the eyes, through the ears, through language, through expectation, through other people's urgency, you become a place where too many unfinished things are stored. Not because you are weak, because the human brain was never designed to be permanently available to everything. A boundary is not rejection. A boundary is shape. Without a boundary, there is no organism. There is only exposure. Hawking spent his life thinking about edges where ordinary intuition fails. The edge of a black hole, the edge of time, the edge between information and disappearance. The lesson is not that your bedroom is the cosmos. The lesson is that edges decide what can be known, what can escape, what can change, and what must be conserved. Silence is one of the smallest edges you can create. On one side, the day keeps asking. On the other side, the brain is allowed to stop answering. That edge does not replace sleep. It honors sleep. It prepares the nervous system to enter the night with fewer unfinished signals clawing at the door. It lets memory loosen its grip. It lets the body become audible again. It lets the mind discover that not every second must be defended with sound. There is a kind of fatigue that sleep repairs. There is another kind of fatigue that comes from never being allowed to be alone with your own signal. For that second fatigue, silence is not emptiness. It is the room where the brain finally stops performing for the world and begins returning to itself. And maybe that is why silence feels strange at first. You are not used to hearing nothing. You are used to hearing everything except yourself.